Hi, I'm John Rallison, the pastor at Journey of Life Lutheran Church, and we had some technical difficulties last Sunday, and so there's no recording of the sermon, so I'm doing this for you now. We began a sermon series last Sunday where we're talking about what's called ordinary time. In the church here, we have this thing called ordinary time, which is the time between the major holidays. So you have Advent and Christmas. Advent's a preparation time, and then Christmas is the major holiday. There's a little piece of ordinary time stuck in there. And then you have Ash Wednesday and Lent, and then the Easter season, which are all kind of holiday things. And then after that, you go back into ordinary time, which is what we're in now, and that continues all the way until essentially the last Sunday in November when Advent begins again. The only other real holiday stuck in the middle there is Reformation Day, October 31st. Well, and All Saints Day, November 1st. But those are individual holidays stuck within this season of ordinary time. And as I was thinking about this, it struck me that most of us live most of our lives in ordinary time. We don't spend most of our time on holidays and things like that. It's just day in and day out. And so that's what we're going to be spending this sermon series talking about, is living well in ordinary time. So the first thing we want to take note of is we got to think for a moment about the way we think about time. In the early world, people typically thought of time as cyclical, excuse me. I'm not going to edit this, I'm just going to do it. Cyclical. And what that means is the same thing that is happening now has happened before and will happen again. And you can understand why they thought of time this way from our own scale, what we can see in terms of time scales available to us without math and telescopes and things like that, and the scales of what we can look at. So it, as a person without any technology to enhance our ability to perceive things, sees fall, winter, spring, summer. Fall, winter, spring, summer. Time is cyclical. It happens over and over again. Birth, life, death. Birth, life, death. And so that's the way time was viewed. It was viewed typically as following a cycle, on and on and on. The same happened before, now will happen again. Time is also typically viewed as a constant. Now, they had creation myths about how things got started, and they usually had to do with some sort of violence, where somebody got cracked on the head and the earth rolled out or something like that, or there was a fight or something. But other than these myths about how things kind of got started, time was seen as a constant. And even though the earth might have had a beginning, the gods kind of always were and things like that. And so time was seen as kind of a constant cycle. It would just kind of keep going around and around, always as it was, it will be. And if we look at the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, the Torah, and we look at the beginning part of it, what we see is a new idea. The very first words of the Bible are in the beginning. And so the scriptures assert that there was a beginning, and the beginning was intentional, and it was by God, and it wasn't a product of violence. It was a product of order and intention, and in fact love and creativity. God said in each cycle it was good. And so we have this sense of a developing universe that's not constant. What the Hebrew scriptures show us is a picture of time moving forward, a time of developing and growing. And when Jesus comes, we hear phrases like the fullness of time. And so time is a thing that progresses and moves forward and develops and grows. And so that presents us a very different picture of time as a whole, and time in our own lives. Because our own lives, there are certainly cycles, and in our sermon series later, we're going to talk about rhythms and things like that. But the idea of development and growth is part of the Bible, of the Hebrew and later the Greek scriptures of the Bible, the Old and New Testament. So we have this idea of growth and progression and beginning and moving toward something that we find is a unique idea in the Hebrew scriptures. And then as we look into the New Testament, which is written in Greek, The Greeks have two main words for types of time. And those two main words are chronos and kairos. And here's the way they work. Chronos is ongoing time. Chronos is time as it moves forward day in and day out. It's the time we normally live in. Kairos are moments in time of profound change, of a dramatic shift. And kairos moments can happen in the world. They can happen when wars are started or ended. They can happen when new inventions come onto the scene. But kairos moments can also be those dramatic shifts in our own perception, maybe of ourselves, our own perception of the world around us. Kairos moments for individuals can be things like getting married. Most people I know, having their first child gives them a dramatic shift in the way they see the world. And so the way the Greeks kind of saw time, and that's the way we're going to look at it, is that there's kind of the smooth flow of time punctuated by individual moments, bam, of profound change or meaning or opening or closing or ending or beginning or those kind of things. And so as we look at time, having mostly these flow moments and bangs every once in a while, the next thing we need to realize is that the Bible reports mostly kairos times. The Bible reports mostly kairos times. It's like a newspaper. You know, the part of the reason the newspaper carries a lot of bad news is because if you think about your life and you really tried to track it all, you would find that it's mostly either mundane or good news, punctuated by occasional bad news. Right? I mean, how would a news report be if the news reporter looked up from the desk and began every day to read the names of all the healthy babies born in your state? I mean, I guess it'd be good news, but who's going to watch it, right? The reason the news is because it's the unusual. It's the very fact of its being unusual that makes it news. And so it is with the Bible. That's what gets reported. Let's take, for instance, Moses, okay? We got Moses here. Moses, here's a card for Moses right there, okay? You can see that. If you're watching, you can see that. If you're listening, you can't. But you can still picture it. It's a timeline of Moses' life. And so the first thing is Moses is born. That's kind of a kairos moment for all of us. When we're born, our life changes dramatically. And in Moses' case, there's this little thing where he gets put in a basket in the river. And then the Pharaoh's daughter finds Moses and takes him in and raises him as a prince, okay? So that's a big deal. He's born, and that's a kairos moment. Then he goes to be raised as a prince, and he's living as a prince in Egypt for 40 years. 40 years. How old are you right now? I don't know how old you are listening to it. I'm turning 50 this year, so I'm 10 more than 40, but I still know 40 years is a long, long, long time. So at 40 years old, Moses, who knows, by the way, that he's Hebrew, because Hebrews look different than Egyptians, but yet he's also a prince. But he's 40 years old and he sees a Hebrew slave being abused and possibly having his life threatened by an Egyptian slave driver, and Moses intervenes and kills the Egyptian, and then he's afraid because he committed murder, so he flees Egypt and runs to the desert. Okay, so that's a kairos moment. 40 years. Born, 40 years of chronos. Boom, kairos moment. The next time we hear of Moses again is when he's 80. So he's got 40 years in Egypt, flees Egypt, 40 more years in the desert. There's some chronos moments in there. He meets Zipporah and gets married and things like that. But his life just kind of goes on until boom, 40 more years, and that's when he encounters God in the burning bush. So for the most of Moses' life, we don't even hear about it. Born, 40 years, boom, kills the Egyptian slave, flees to the desert. 40 more years, boom, burning bush. So that's what the Bible does. It reports kairos moments. And the thing is, if you read the Bible and you think, why is my life not like that? Why do I not have all these I read about all these miracles and these wonderful things, and why does that not happen to me? Well, listen, back to Moses. I'll hold Moses up again. Moses had two big things he could remember. In fact, the one big thing, really, that was actually God encounter happened when he was 80. Okay? So the idea that your life is supposed to be a constant God encounter, I'm not saying it can't be, or I'm not trying to make a prescription for you. I do think life can be filled with an awful lot of wonder and awe, what some people would call worship. But when you read the Bible, you need to recognize that you are reading the Kairos moments, and it just jumps from exciting moment to exciting moment to exciting moment. And usually there's a lot of time in between each of those moments. So I don't want you to get disturbed or sad or something because your life doesn't seem like the Bible. Well, yeah, Moses had these two big things 40 years apart. So we got Moses, and he was 40 years and then 40 years. And so that brings us to another point, and this is the next point. Ordinary time is not unimportant time. Ordinary time is not unimportant time. Let's go back to Moses again. God's plan for Moses was to lead the Israelites out of Egypt into the Promised Land. And that's going to take a couple of different skills. It's going to have to take a couple of different skill sets. The first is going to be the ability to navigate Egyptian royalty, right? He has to have access to the prince. He also has to have standing in the royal house, right? Because let's say just some random Hebrew went up and tried to approach the Pharaoh to say, you need to let these people go. What would happen? Right? Instantly. Just cut off his head. Next. That's what would happen. And so the first part of Moses' life, the first part of his chronos, that long drawn-out time of being a prince of Egypt, he learns all about leading large groups of people. He's a prince in a major country. He learns about leadership. He learns about administration. He has all these relationships with all these people. And so what happens when he comes back to say, let my people go, that God had told him to tell the Pharaoh, he has access. He knows proper court manners. He knows the whole deal. And in fact, because he's a prince, he's very comfortable standing in the palace that he grew up in, right? So that's the first part. His chronos, that part of the chronos prepared him for his leadership job of the Israelites. Now, the second part of the chronos was 40 years in the desert. He was going to have to lead people through the desert. And where are you going to acquire the skills to live in the desert and lead all these people with confidence? Well, you have to live a long time in the desert yourself first to acquire that. And so both of these times of chronos, even though they were sort of long drawn out, the boring, the basic kind of time, nothing exceedingly exciting is happening, they were times of preparation. And so that's the first thing, is that chronos prepares us for kairos moments. Our chronos time prepares us for kairos moments. When we live faithfully, when we engage in the practices that will help us and prepare us and empower us and help us grow, our chronos time prepares us for those kairos moments when they happen. The second thing is that chronos time, that the drawn out periods of time, regular life, also allows us the space to process kairos moments. In most kairos moments, those punctuated moments, we are not in a place, and really we shouldn't even be in a place where we're trying to process the moment. Kairos moments are moments to be experienced. You know, Moses at the burning bush, he's not like, his mind hasn't like sort of flitted out to take a third-party view of this thing and say, oh, isn't this interesting? Look at me, I'm talking to God. I wonder what this means for me. No, he's in the moment. People in weddings, when you're up at the front and it's your wedding, that's a kairos moment, and you don't think, you're not like analyzing the wedding. You don't like take a little card out of your pocket and take notes on the pastor's sermon. You're there, you're in the moment. That's the nature of kairos moments. So you need the chronos after kairos in order to process those moments. But part of that is reflecting. And so part of what we're going to be talking about the next few weeks are different practices that have helped people through the years, and different practices we see in the scriptures that help people use Chronos as preparation for Kairos and as processing for Kairos, because that's what Chronos gives us the space to do: prepare and to process. Now, a couple other things I just want to bring to your attention as we kind of come to the close of this introduction to this message series is as we move through Chronos time, and Kairos for that matter, one of the ground rule assumptions that the Christian Bible asserts for us is that God is always present. That God is always present. And so that has a profound effect on the way we use Chronos. That has a profound effect on the way we use Chronos moments to prepare and to process our Kairos moments. God is always present. But the problem we have is tuning in to God. Yeah, that little wavy thing on the top, if you're watching this, the wavy thing on the top is a sine wave, and that's the radio wave. And then that box with the line sticking out of it, well, that's my version of a radio. Yes, now you can tell how old I am. Anyway, the thing we need to do, one of the main things that these practices for our Chronos time help us do, is tune in to God, tune into the way things are going on, to help us understand, to help us prepare and process the Kairos moments of our life. So here's some of the things we're going to go through in the next few weeks. We're going to talk about the idea of Christian vocation, which is that you are doing the work of God wherever you are. It's not as though you have to set aside what you're doing to go do God's work. The next item is rhythm. We're going to talk about rhythms that the scriptures and other people have had in their lives that have been helpful for their Chronos time. We're going to talk about the practice of gratitude and how to work that into our lives. Is very vital. And there's a good body of scientific research now that talks about the vitality of gratitude. We're going to talk about those disruptions, because sometimes those are the hard things when you're like moving through some pretty sweet Chronos time, right? Some times of reflection, or when there's just you kind of have this joyful time of smooth life, and then there's a disruption in that. We're going to talk about living an open life instead of a closed life. We're going to talk about release. In my blog post last week, I mentioned some research, again, on that people who forgive conditionally, meaning that they wait for someone else to say they're sorry or they won't do it again before they forgive them, actually don't live as long. And so we're going to talk about the process of releasing these things in our lives. And we're going to talk about practices of centeredness. We've all had moments where we sort of feel discombobulated, or we're kind of flailing around. We're really like off the mark. And we're going to talk about processes and habits that have helped people stay centered in their lives. So what we're going to find out is that ordinary time is not an important time. And in fact, ordinary time can be, oh, isn't this clever, extraordinary time. Yes, extraordinary time. How does that happen? Well, the Bible says that one of the things God wants to do for us is give us fresh eyes. We need fresh eyes. There was a time when a man came to Jesus to ask him about the kingdom of God. And Jesus told him, unless you are born again, you cannot see the kingdom of God. And of course, there's a big we would say in our Lutheran theology that there is a moment when we are born again, when we are baptized. But we also, I think, need to recognize there's other times in our life where it almost feels like we're reborn. We have a new, fresh perspective. And God needs to provide that fresh perspective for us. So as we go through our lives, we ask, what is it that we are supposed to do during all this Chronos that we've got? Because we've got a lot of Chronos and a little Kairos. So what's the work of Chronos? If you could boil it down to one thing? Somebody asked Jesus, What must we do to be doing the works of God? And Jesus said this. He said the work of God is to believe in the one he has sent. And the scriptures tell us that that is Jesus. And when it says believe in, it doesn't mean believe like acknowledge, like, yes, I believe there's a very tall building in Chicago called the Sears Tower. I don't actually know if Sears owns it anymore, but it used to be called the Sears Tower anyway. But that's not what belief means. Believe in this context means to trust, to be a student of. So really you could say that the basic work comes or grows out of being a student of Jesus, learning from Jesus. So that's how we're going to be, that's who we're going to be learning from. And what Jesus said is that if you abide in my word, you are truly my students. So if you follow my word, you're my students, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. The truth will set you free. So that's pretty good news. That's where we're going, and I hope you'll go there with us. I usually offer some questions for reflection at the end of my sermon, and I'm going to do that for you right now. So here's 3 questions you can think about if you want something to think about this week. One is, do I see ordinary time as something to get through in order to get to the next important moment? In other words, are you in that mode right now where you're just trying to get through what you're in instead of embrace where you are and what's going on in your life in the moment and what the things that are going on in your life bring to you? Because even if it doesn't matter whether you're in hard times or easy times or you're on a high or a low, wherever you are, that's bringing something to you. And there's a way in which that can be embraced as part of who you are and part of your journey. And so you are missing an opportunity for the preparation and the processing of Chronos if you're in a time when you're just trying to like get through it instead of be in it. So that's the first question. Do I see my ordinary time as something I'm just supposed to like get through in order to get to the next important moment? The second question is, what is one way your eyes have been opened since your childhood? How do you see things differently? What's one way you're sort of like a different person? You've kind of been born again. Not maybe in that big sense, the theological sense, but how have your eyes been opened? And the last question is a simple question, but it's, I think, a profound question, because we all need someone to learn from, someone to follow, really. And so my question is, are you a student of Jesus? Not are you a Christian, because that word has all sorts of baggage and all sorts of ways to think about it that don't really get down to the nitty-gritty of what's going on there. So what I really want you to think about is, are you a student of Jesus? Meaning, do you study Jesus and try to figure out how to follow him? So my question is, are you a student of Jesus? And if so, what in your life might indicate to an outside observer that you are a student of Jesus? And if you're not a student of Jesus, I would like to encourage you to consider becoming a student of Jesus, because there's an awful lot to offer you. An awful lot to offer you. And I would love actually to send you a Bible. If you want to shoot me an email and your address, and I will send you a Bible, and you can start reading one of the Gospels. But of course, if you're watching this, you're online already, and you can just go to BibleGateway.com and read the Bible in any version you want. I would suggest, if you are just getting started, you look for the New Living Translation. And you can read any one of the Gospels in the New Living Translation, and they'll work for you. I'll tell you, Luke is sort of a simple historical one. Mark is kind of like the newspaper version, really fast, short, moves quickly. John is kind of like the rich theological gospel. And then Matthew is a gospel that really is written with a Jewish audience in mind. So those are the 4 gospels. Pick one, pick whichever one you want. And I am glad that you stayed through this with me. And I wish you God's richest blessings of grace and peace.